Hollywood spent decades turning native people into stereotypes in westerns, but the real history stayed hidden in government vaults. Civilizations that matched ancient Rome, weapons technology that Europeans copied, and genocides the history books conveniently forgot. These aren't myths passed down through stories. They're 20 verified facts that teachers never mentioned and documentaries refuse to show. Subscribe to Curious Historians to keep watching videos like this. Number 1. Long before any European explorer touched American soil, a thriving metropolis already stood where Illinois sits today. Cahokia, just outside modern St. Louis, housed up to 20,000 residents around 1050 AD. Want perspective? London at that exact time had a smaller population. These weren't primitive dwellings. The inhabitants constructed enormous earthen mounds, some towering higher than any European building of that period. They mastered agricultural techniques that sustained massive populations and built a complex society with trade networks stretching all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. So what destroyed this civilization? By 1350, Cahokia was completely deserted. Scientists believe overpopulation exhausted the area's resources. The land simply couldn't support that many people anymore. Centuries later, when Europeans finally arrived, they discovered only overgrown hills, completely unaware of the advanced city that once existed there. Before we continue to number 2, tell me, did you ever learn about Cahokia in any history class? Comment yes or no. I'm betting 95% of you are saying no. Number 2. During World War II, the US military faced a crisis. Japanese codebreakers were cracking every American communication within hours. Lives were being lost because the enemy knew every move before it happened. Then someone had an unexpected idea. The military recruited young Navajo men to develop a code using their native language. The outcome? A system with over 400 military terms that Japanese intelligence never once decoded, not even close. These men transmitted crucial messages at Iwo Jima and Okinawa while enemy fire rained down around them. Military historians agree. Without the Navajo code talkers, several major Pacific battles could have ended in American defeat. But here's the part that should anger you. When these heroes returned home, the government ordered them to stay silent about their service. The code remained classified until the 1960s, and official recognition only came in 2000, after most of them had already passed away. This photograph captures these warriors in uniform, a historical record that stayed buried for decades. Number 3. Long before America's founding fathers gathered in Philadelphia, 6 native nations had already solved a problem that would plague Washington and Jefferson for years. How do you unite different groups without anyone surrendering their voice? The Haudenosaunee, whom colonizers called the Iroquois, created a confederacy with representative councils where every nation held veto power. Benjamin Franklin witnessed this system firsthand and was deeply impressed. In 1754, he introduced the Albany Plan, obviously influenced by this native governmental structure. Decades later, when delegates argued over the Constitution, that indigenous model was already being discussed. Senators and representatives, individual states with autonomy yet unified under a federal system. Just coincidence? Historians still debate how directly the Iroquois shaped American democracy, but one fact is undeniable: representative government already existed in America centuries before 1776. Let me know in the comments. If Native Americans invented the democratic system America uses today, why do textbooks give all the credit to ancient Greece and Rome? Share your theory in the comments. Number 4. When Columbus landed, the Americas contained roughly 100 million people, potentially more than all of Europe combined. We're talking about sophisticated cities, advanced farming systems, and continental trade networks. Within just 150 years, European diseases eliminated approximately 90% of that population. It remains the most catastrophic population collapse in recorded human history. But here's what rarely gets discussed. For centuries, school textbooks taught that colonizers discovered lands that were essentially uninhabited, just waiting to be claimed. The reality tells a completely different story. Early explorers documented dense villages lining rivers and cultivated fields extending for miles. Decades later, other travelers passed through those same locations and found only wilderness, ruins consumed by forest growth. The empty land narrative didn't appear accidentally. It was far more convenient than acknowledging what actually occurred. Stop and think about this. How much of American history depends on pretending those 90 million people never existed? Drop your thoughts below. Number 5. The US government implemented a system that operated for nearly a century with one explicit goal: completely erasing indigenous identity. Starting in 1879, over 400 boarding schools opened across the nation with a clear objective: transforming indigenous children into civilized Americans. The official motto was shockingly direct: kill the Indian, save the man. Here's the horrifying process. Federal agents arrived at reservations and forcibly removed children, sometimes as young as 5. Many families never reunited with their kids. At these institutions, boys' hair was immediately cut. Speaking even one word of native languages brought severe punishment, and brutal discipline awaited anyone who resisted. What most people don't realize is how many children completely lost connection to their heritage and communities. Recent investigations are finally uncovering documentation that's only now being properly examined and understood. The final boarding school didn't shut down until 1978. That's correct, less than 50 years ago. Number 6. In 1890, a native religious movement sent Washington, D.C. into absolute panic. The Lakota practiced the ghost dance, a spiritual ritual that promised something deeply threatening to white settlers. The prophecy claimed the land would be restored, buffalo would return by the millions, and white people would simply disappear, not through warfare, but through divine intervention. The movement spread rapidly among different tribes, and military commanders didn't wait to see if the prophecy might come true. Fear of a coordinated indigenous uprising brought federal troops to Wounded Knee, resulting in one of the most devastating and thoroughly documented massacres of that era in December 1890. This photograph captures the dancers in spiritual trance, taken shortly before the Wounded Knee tragedy. Government authorities confiscated images like this one, worried they would encourage other indigenous peoples to join the movement that prophesied erasing white America from the continent. Number 7. Did you know that in multiple Native American societies women held the real power? Yeah, that probably surprises many people. Among the Cherokee, for instance, clans followed maternal lineage. Women controlled land ownership, home management, and even voted on war and peace decisions. Men fought battles, sure, but the ultimate authority on most major issues came from the clan's elder women. And it goes further. Some women weren't just influential leaders. Luzon, an Apache warrior, fought directly alongside Geronimo against the US Army throughout the late 1800s. She gained fame for her exceptional tracking abilities, and people claimed she possessed a supernatural sense for detecting approaching enemies. Geronimo himself called her the shield of her people. This female authority structure completely baffled Europeans when they arrived here. Number 8. Picture dozens of tribes speaking entirely different languages, yet still managing to negotiate deals, coordinate hunts, and even form military alliances without comprehending a single spoken word from each other. That was daily reality on the Great Plains. Native peoples created a hand sign language so sophisticated it functioned more effectively than many written treaties. Traders exchanged horses for firearms, warriors planned battle strategies, and rival tribes negotiated peace agreements, all in complete silence. Historians estimate over 30 different nations understood and utilized this communication system. The most fascinating detail? When early white explorers first appeared, many learned these hand signals before attempting any spoken native language. It was simply the most efficient method to survive and conduct business across that vast territory, where every region might speak a completely different language. Real question, why isn't Native American Sign Language taught in schools alongside American Sign Language? Shouldn't we preserve this piece of American history? Yes or no in the comments. Number 9. Did you know lacrosse originated as something radically different from today's college sport? The Iroquois named this game Little War, and they had legitimate reasons for that title. Matches could continue for entire days, involving hundreds of participants on each side, played across fields spanning miles. There was zero rules preventing physical contact. Broken bones occurred regularly, and deaths weren't uncommon. Tribes used these competitions to resolve territorial conflicts, train warriors, and prepare young men for actual combat. Yes, it was violent, but it also carried profound spiritual significance. Native peoples believed the game pleased the Creator. When French colonizers first witnessed lacrosse, they were absolutely shocked by its intensity. The refined sport played today on manicured fields evolved from something resembling genuine warfare. Number 10. Long before modern pharmacies existed, Native Americans already understood something medical science would take centuries to verify. They chewed willow bark to alleviate pain and reduce fevers. The active ingredient? A compound we now identify as salicylic acid, the chemical foundation of aspirin. When colonizers arrived, they observed this medicinal knowledge and transported it back to Europe. In 1897, Bayer patented aspirin and generated billions in profit. But here's the detail rarely mentioned. No recognition was ever given to the indigenous peoples who discovered it originally. It was medicine men and healers who transmitted this wisdom across generations. They also treated infections and injuries using plants that contemporary medicine still studies today. Consider this carefully. How many medications in your bathroom cabinet originated from knowledge that was essentially stolen and relabeled with scientific terminology? Number 11. Before Columbus's arrival, slavery already existed on this continent. Long before Europeans landed, native tribes practiced something few history textbooks acknowledge. When one tribe defeated another in combat, the conquered didn't simply retreat. Captives became property of the victors. This occurred everywhere from Canada down to South America. The Aztecs, for example, enslaved thousands from neighboring tribes. In the Pacific Northwest, certain tribes inherited enslaved people across generations. It wasn't identical to the later European system, but it was undeniably slavery. Captives labored without freedom and could be traded like commodities. When colonizers arrived, some tribes even sold their enslaved captives to them. The complete historical picture is more complex than what schools taught us. Number 12. In 1680, something extraordinary happened in New Mexico that history books nearly erased. A leader named Pope achieved what seemed impossible. He unified Pueblo tribes that spoke different languages and harbored old rivalries. On August 10th, they launched simultaneous attacks on multiple fronts. Approximately 400 Spanish colonizers were killed, and survivors fled south in desperation. But what followed is the part few know. The Pueblo people governed their own territory for a full 12 years. They burned churches, destroyed colonial records, and restored traditional practices. It was the most significant defeat the Spanish Empire ever suffered in the Americas at indigenous hands. When Spanish forces finally returned in 1692, they encountered a people who had proven their capability to win. Number 13. For decades, archaeologists and grave robbers invaded tribal territories and simply took whatever they discovered. Ancestral remains, ceremonial objects, sacred items tribes had protected for centuries, all of it disappeared into museums and private collections nationwide. Estimates suggest U.S. institutions still possess hundreds of thousands of these artifacts. In 1990, Congress passed legislation requiring their return. But the repatriation process continues, dragging to this day. Many tribes don't even know precisely what was stolen or its current location. Some items have been gone so long that young people on reservations have never seen objects their great-grandparents used in sacred rituals. Museums claim bureaucratic complications slow the process, but critics argue the delayed pace is deliberately convenient. Meanwhile, entire communities continue waiting to reclaim pieces of their own heritage that should never have been taken. Number 14. For centuries, Native Americans lost virtually everything: land, rights, dignity, opportunity. But in 1988, federal legislation literally transformed the game. The Indian Gaming Regulatory Act permitted tribes to operate casinos on reservation land, territories where state gambling regulations held no jurisdiction. The result? An unprecedented economic reversal. Today, the native gaming industry generates over $40 billion annually, surpassing Las Vegas and Atlantic City combined. Some tribes transition from extreme poverty to constructing schools, hospitals, and funding scholarships for their youth. Obviously, benefits weren't distributed equally, and the sudden wealth created its own challenges. But the irony is impossible to ignore. The same government that attempted erasing these communities inadvertently created the legal framework for their economic resurrection. Number 15. Did you know the United States signed over 500 treaties with indigenous nations and violated every single one? Not most of them, not some, every single one. Since 1778, the federal government promised land protection and sovereignty to native peoples. In exchange, tribes peacefully surrendered millions of acres. But every time gold appeared, oil was discovered, or railroads needed routes, those agreements became worthless paper. The most infamous example occurred in 1868, when the Fort Laramie Treaty guaranteed the Black Hills to the Sioux forever. It lasted 8 years. Gold was found, and the army invaded. The Supreme Court acknowledged in 1980 that it constituted theft and offered monetary compensation. The Sioux refused. They still refuse today. The financial offer has accumulated to over $1 billion sitting untouched in an account. This is the story schools don't teach. Number 16. Long before any modern debate about controlled substances, Native American tribes had utilized peyote for thousands of years. And it wasn't for entertainment. It was serious religious practice. Medicine men consumed this cactus during sacred ceremonies to connect with the spirit realm and receive visions guiding the entire tribe. Critical decisions about warfare, hunting, and even marriages depended on these spiritual rituals. The interesting development? The US government attempted banning the practice multiple times, but in 1994, federal legislation finally protected religious peyote use by recognized tribes. Contemporary scientists now study these substances for treating depression and trauma. What indigenous peoples understood for millennia, modern medicine is only beginning to rediscover. Number 17. Many people assume native peoples lived in complete harmony before Europeans arrived. That's not accurate. Tribes fought each other over territory, resources, and dominance long before Columbus was even born. The Comanche, for instance, controlled the plains and pushed the Apache toward the southwest. The Iroquois constructed a regional empire through military conquest. There were alliances, betrayals, and conflicts spanning generations. This doesn't diminish colonization's devastating impact, obviously. But understanding complete history reveals they were sophisticated societies with politics, military tactics, and power dynamics like any civilization. The introduction of horses and firearms later simply intensified conflicts that had existed for centuries. Be honest, does knowing Native Americans fought each other make them seem more human and complex to you, or does it feel like it diminishes their victimization? Comment your genuine reaction. Number 18. Check this fact most people never learned. 60% of everything you eat today originated in the Americas before Columbus arrived. Corn, potatoes, tomatoes, squash, peanuts, chocolate, vanilla, peppers. Native peoples had been cultivating all of this for thousands of years. Italy didn't have tomato sauce. Ireland had never seen potatoes. Africa didn't know corn existed. These crops crossed oceans and fundamentally transformed how the entire planet eats. But here's the problem. For centuries, history books credited Europeans who merely transported these plants elsewhere. The actual agricultural innovators who developed these cultivation methods over generations were completely forgotten. Consider that next time you're enjoying corn at a barbecue. This farming expertise dates back at least 9,000 years. Number 19. Here's something that'll challenge everything you learned. Scientists analyzing ancient DNA discovered something startling in Native American genetic material. They found traces suggesting contact with European populations long before Columbus ever reached the Americas. We're discussing thousands of years ago. How is that even possible? Some researchers theorize groups from modern-day Iceland or Scandinavia may have crossed the North Atlantic using ice bridges during glacial periods. Others reference the Vikings, who we know reached North America around 1000 AD. The reality is our genetic code tells stories that history textbooks are still struggling to explain. The truth about who actually reached this continent first may be far more complicated than what schools taught us. Number 20. In 1680, a man named Pope accomplished what few ever managed. He expelled the Spanish from New Mexico for 12 years. He united Pueblo tribes that traditionally didn't cooperate and led an uprising that caught colonizers completely off guard. Spanish forces only returned after his death. Today, Pope's statue stands in the U.S. Capitol in Washington. He's the only Native American represented in the National Statuary Hall. Each state can place 2 statues there, and New Mexico selected Pope in 2005. For centuries, history books barely acknowledged his existence. Now he shares space with celebrated presidents and military generals. History doesn't always remember who it should, but occasionally it corrects itself. These facts are real, researched in actual archives and verified by historians. Hollywood buried them because they complicate the narrative. Schools skip them because they're uncomfortable, but they're true. And they matter. Final question. Which fact shocked you the most? Comment the number from 1 to 20. And if you learned something that changed how you see American history, hit that like button. Share this if you were shocked. Subscribe to Curious Historians if you want more uncomfortable truths they don't teach in school. Because history isn't about what's comfortable, it's about what's true.